You check your paycheck on Friday and still start cutting back by Sunday, that pressure already feels familiar. But the hidden shift is not inflation alone. It is that AI is quietly changing what work gets paid for at all. In some knowledge heavy roles, workers using AI are already finishing certain tasks about 25 to 40% faster. And when that kind of productivity gap enters the same labor market, earnings do not just stall, they start to slip. That lands colder than panic because it feels plausible. And when that repricing spreads across whole industries, money stops rewarding effort the way most people still expect, while the people who see it early begin moving by a different set of rules. Take two adults living through the exact same AI era. They are both serious about money. They both want more margin, more control, more stability, and less financial anxiety. Neither one is a celebrity. Neither one starts with a giant company, a huge audience, or some extraordinary technical background. They are normal people trying to survive in an economy that has already become less forgiving, less patient, and less generous than it used to be. But they respond to AI in two completely different ways. And that difference ends up shaping how money treats them over the next few years. The first person keeps using an old mental model. They think money comes mainly from effort, reliability, and accumulated skill in a familiar lane. So they keep doing what has always felt respectable. They work hard, they learn a bit, they improve their output, they stay responsible. They assume AI is mostly a bonus feature that may help them go a little faster. They do not think deeply about how AI changes the price of work itself. They still measure their value by how much they can personally produce. More drafts, more tasks, more deliverables, more hours made useful. On the surface, they look disciplined. In reality, they are drifting into a dangerous zone. Because the more AI lowers the cost of producing decent output, the more the market stops paying a premium for effort that can be multiplied cheaply. So this person feels pressure without fully understanding its cause. Clients negotiate harder. Employers expect more. Turnaround time shrinks. The gap between good work and expected work disappears. What once made them stand out now just qualifies them to compete. They are not failing in an obvious way. That is why the trap is so effective. Their paycheck may still come in. Their work may still be appreciated. But their leverage weakens. Their replaceability rises. Their income ceiling gets tighter. They feel like they are running faster just to protect a standard of living that keeps slipping away from them in slow motion. Now look at the second person. They see AI and immediately understand that money is about to reward a different layer of value. They stop thinking only in terms of producing outputs and start thinking in terms of controlling outcomes. They ask harder questions. Where does money actually get made in this chain? What part of this work is becoming common? What part stays scarce? Where does trust sit? Where does decision quality sit? Where does distribution sit? Where does ownership sit? Where does human accountability still matter enough that somebody will pay for it? That person still works hard, but not in the same direction. They use AI to reduce the cost of production, then reposition themselves around what remains scarce. Instead of merely writing, they shape messaging tied to revenue. Instead of merely researching, they turn insight into decisions. Instead of merely designing, they connect design to conversion, retention, or brand positioning. Instead of merely doing tasks, they build systems that make other tasks cheaper, faster, and more reliable. They move closer to the money layer. The result is not magic. It is economic asymmetry. One person competes in a market where value is being flooded. The other competes in a market where value is being curated, directed, and owned. One becomes easier to benchmark and squeeze. The other becomes harder to replace because their work affects real outcomes inside a business or market. Same AI era, same broad access, different theory of money, different future. Here's the hidden truth most people miss when they talk about money in the AI era. AI does not destroy the value of intelligence evenly. It destroys the market price of standardized intelligence first. That distinction matters because people keep assuming the threat is AI is smarter or AI can do my job. That is too crude. The deeper issue is that AI makes many forms of competence less scarce. And once competence becomes less scarce, money stops honoring it the way it used to. For decades, a large share of economic value came from bottlenecks in cognition. If you could write clearly, analyze data, summarize information, organize a plan, produce a proposal, structure an argument, draft content, brainstorm options, explain complexity, or generate decent first pass work, that carried market weight. Not because those activities were magical, but because they were costly. They took time. They required skill. They required labor. That cost created price support. AI changes that. It attacks the cost structure underneath white-collar usefulness. That is why the title is brutal. The brutality is not that money disappears. The brutality is that money becomes more selective about what it rewards. Once ordinary output gets cheaper, the premium shifts upward or outward. Upward toward people with better judgment, stronger distribution, deeper expertise, and more ownership. Outward toward people who control customer relationships, brand trust, sales channels, proprietary data, decision rights, and operational systems. In other words, AI does not eliminate money. It concentrates it around scarce coordination points. This is why so many smart people may feel more financially insecure, not less. They confuse capability with economic defensibility. Those are no longer the same thing. You may still be competent. You may still produce solid work. You may still outperform many peers. But if the market now has a cheaper path to good enough, your competence alone loses pricing power. And pricing power is what determines whether money flows to you with force or only drips in through effort. The hidden truth goes further. AI rewards people who can combine low-cost intelligence with real-world stakes. That means context, accountability, taste, prioritization, sequencing, negotiation, trust, and the ability to act inside messy reality become more valuable. Why? Because raw output is not the same as applied consequence. Businesses do not make money from text alone. They make money from decisions that change revenue, reduce cost, lower risk, retain customers, speed execution, and improve control. That layer still needs human alignment, especially where stakes are high, context is unstable, incentives are messy, or the cost of being wrong is too high to ignore. So the brutal truth about money is this. The more AI expands the supply of acceptable thinking and acceptable production, the less the market pays for people whose role is limited to generating acceptable work. The people who win are not necessarily the smartest in the old sense. They are the ones closest to scarce consequences, closest to the client, closest to the buyer, closest to the system, closest to distribution, closest to the decision, closest to ownership. In the AI era, money does not simply reward effort and skill. It rewards control over scarcity after intelligence becomes cheap. This is not just a theory about where money might go. The repricing has already started showing up in measurable ways, and the numbers point in the same direction often enough that it becomes hard to dismiss them as isolated curiosities. In one of the clearest field studies so far, researchers Eric Brynjolfsson, Danielle Lee, and Lindsay Raymond studied more than 5,000 customer support agents and found that access to generative AI increased productivity by roughly 14 to 15% overall. For less experienced and lower skilled workers, the gain was much larger, closer to 30 to 35%. That detail matters more than people realize. It means AI is not only making top performers slightly better, it is raising the floor. It is making acceptable performance cheaper and easier to produce at scale. And once that happens, the market price of merely being competent starts to weaken. That is brutal if your income depends on doing solid work that used to be hard enough to command a premium. The same pattern showed up in high-value knowledge work. In the Harvard Business School and Boston Consulting Group field experiment, consultants using GPT-4 completed 12.2% more tasks, finished 25.1% faster, and produced work judged to be more than 40% higher in quality on average. That is not a small efficiency gain. That is a direct shift in the economics of white-collar labor. If one person can deliver more work faster at higher quality, then the firm employing them gains more output per unit of salary, and the buyer receiving that work starts expecting more as the new normal. That is how money gets reweighted. The market stops rewarding effort at the old rate because the same effort, augmented by AI, now produces much more. Writing-heavy work shows the same trend. In a controlled study published in Science, workers using ChatGPT completed professional writing tasks 40% faster, while quality improved by 18%. That matters because much of modern knowledge work is writing in disguised form. Proposals, briefs, summaries, client emails, reports, planning documents, internal memos, research notes, and sales communication. Once those outputs become faster and cheaper to generate, the standalone market value of producing them falls. The money does not disappear, it shifts. It moves away from routine production and toward judgment, interpretation, prioritization, client trust, and ownership of the outcome. Even software work points in the same direction. In a randomized controlled trial involving developers, programmers using an AI coding assistant completed tasks significantly faster than those without it. The exact percentage varied by task and experience level, but the broad result remained consistent. The cost of producing usable technical output dropped. That matters because software work has long been treated as one of the clearest examples of valuable cognitive labor. When even that category begins to feel time compression, the signal is no longer confined to one narrow corner of office work. Economically, that is the core pattern. When the cost of production falls across multiple cognitive domains at once, the old pricing structure becomes unstable. The brutal truth is not that all skilled work vanishes. It is that markets stop paying old prices for work that is no longer as scarce to produce. Business adoption data reinforces the same conclusion. McKinsey reported in 2024 that 65% of surveyed organizations were already regularly using generative AI, nearly double the level from the previous survey. Stanford's 2025 AI Index then showed that 78% of organizations reported using AI in 2024, while global private investment in generative AI reached $33.9 billion. Those numbers matter because they show this is no longer an edge case or a lab curiosity. Companies are not adopting AI because it is intellectually interesting. They are adopting it because they expect lower labor cost, faster operations, more output per employee, and stronger margins. That is money logic, not technology fandom. And once enough firms start acting on that logic at the same time, the pressure does not stay inside boardrooms. It moves outward into hiring standards, client expectations, project pricing, turnaround speed, and the baseline definition of what counts as ordinary performance. Put those proof points together, and the pattern becomes difficult to deny. AI is increasing the supply of usable cognitive output. It is making decent work faster, cheaper, and easier to generate. It is helping weaker performers close part of the gap. It is pushing firms to expect more from the same labor. And when all of that happens at once, the market does what markets always do. It reprices abundance downward and shifts rewards toward what remains scarce. That is the data-backed reality behind this title. The brutal truth about money in the AI era is not simply that AI helps people work faster. It is that once intelligence-like production becomes cheaper, money stops paying old premiums for it and starts concentrating around judgment, trust, consequence, distribution, and ownership. Now comes the part that makes this harder than a normal economic shift. People are psychologically built to underestimate it. Not because they are stupid, because the human mind is bad at recognizing quiet repricing when daily life still looks mostly normal. Most people have an internal money story formed over years. Study, improve, become competent, work hard, stay reliable, and income should gradually reflect your effort and skill. That story was never perfectly true, but it was true enough to organize a life around. It was stable enough to make long-term decisions with. The AI era destabilizes that story in a very specific way. It does not immediately tell people you are no longer valuable. Instead, it blurs their value slowly. It changes the market around them before it changes how they describe themselves. And slow blurring is psychologically dangerous because it does not trigger emergency thinking soon enough. People also over-attach to identity-level competence. If you spent years becoming the person who writes well, the person who researches fast, the person who solves things, the person who handles communication, or the person who produces polished work, it is emotionally difficult to accept that the market may now pay less for those strengths in isolation. That feels unfair because it is unfair at the personal level. But markets are not loyalty systems. They are pricing systems. They do not care how long something took you to build if technology has reduced the cost of getting a similar result. There is also a false comfort that comes from still being needed. Many people will remain needed and still be underpaid relative to the value they once could command. That is one of the most deceptive parts of the AI era. Relevance and leverage are not the same. You can remain employed, remain busy, remain respected, and still be sliding into a weaker money position because your role is being reclassified from scarce to available. Another psychological trap is tool fascination. People feel productive when they experiment with AI. They generate text, ideas, images, workflows, code, and drafts. That activity creates the sensation of economic progress, but sensation is not the same as money. The mind loves visible output because it feels like advancement. Yet the real financial question is far stricter. Does this output sit near a revenue stream, a cost center, a risk reduction point, a trusted relationship, or an ownership position? If not, the person may be becoming more efficient without becoming more economically secure. Fear creates distortion too. Some people freeze because they think AI means total replacement. Others dismiss the shift because the total replacement story sounds exaggerated. Both reactions miss the harder middle truth. Not total replacement, but partial commoditization. Not zero human value, but lower market payment for certain categories of human effort. That middle truth is less dramatic, but far more financially important. Psychologically, the winning move is painful because it requires ego separation. You have to stop asking, "What am I good at?" as the primary question. You have to ask, what will remain scarce enough that money must still chase it? That shift feels brutal because it forces people to see themselves through market logic rather than self-concept. But until they do, they will keep mistaking activity for leverage, relevance for pricing power, and competence for security. So what do you do with the brutal truth about money in the AI era? You stop treating AI like a novelty and start treating it like a pressure test on your economic value. That is the only useful response. Not panic, not denial, not empty enthusiasm. Pressure test your money position. First, identify exactly what part of your current income comes from producing output that is becoming easier and cheaper to generate. Be honest. Not emotionally honest. Economically honest. Which parts of your work are mainly drafting, summarizing, formatting, researching, organizing, explaining, or producing standard assets? Which parts are already drifting toward good enough in the eyes of a buyer or employer? Those functions may still matter, but their standalone pricing power is weakening. If you depend on them without a scarcer layer attached, you are standing in the compression zone. Second, move closer to consequences. Money pays more aggressively where your work affects outcomes that matter to someone with a budget. Revenue, cost, speed, retention, compliance, trust, decision quality, execution risk, customer conversion, operational reliability. That is where you need to reposition. Do not think only about what you can make. Think about what you can change. In the AI era, output is abundant. Consequence is scarce. Third, Build a scarcity stack around yourself. That means combining AI with advantages that are harder to copy: domain expertise, industry knowledge, taste, judgment, relationships, distribution, proof of results, ownership of a process, ownership of an audience, ownership of a business asset, access to clients, access to decision makers, a system people rely on, a reputation tied to real outcomes. The point is not to reject AI. The point is to use AI as the cheap engine inside a larger structure of value that still commands money. Fourth, learn to think like a buyer. Buyers do not pay premiums because someone worked hard. They pay when uncertainty falls, speed rises, risk drops, revenue improves, or an expensive problem gets solved. That mindset changes everything. It forces you out of the labor mindset and into the leverage mindset. It helps you stop selling effort and start selling effect. Finally, accept the emotional sting of this title. The brutal truth is brutal because it removes comforting illusions. The AI era will not reward everyone equally. It will not preserve old pricing structures out of fairness. It will not guarantee that being competent, diligent, and sincere is enough to protect your money. But it does offer one clear advantage to people willing to see the situation clearly. Once you understand that AI is making intelligence-like output cheaper, you can stop anchoring your future to what is becoming abundant and start building around what remains scarce. That is the dividing line. People who keep selling abundance will feel money tightening around them. People who use abundance to control scarcity will live in a different financial reality. And in the AI era, that difference is not academic. It is the difference between earning inside the system's repricing and being repriced by it.